And I just walked over just to introduce myself.
He couldn't believe
He just looked at me and he just was like, "You're not a funeral director." I was like, "Yep, I am." And he rang through to his boss and was just like, "Have you seen this?" He said, "Chick, I think. Have you seen this chick?" People will often say, "Oh my gosh, how do you cope with like being around all that death? It's so morbid," or all those things. And I'm just like, there's nothing morbid about it. I'm living in the profound every day, in the liminal space, doing and being with people at their most raw and vulnerable, but more than anything, real time of their life. Because everything else drops away and stops. So I get to really meet people.
I think this is her niche, and she works with bodies and has to do some pretty heavy things sometimes and handles it really well with a kind of groundedness, which I think is pretty amazing. Whereas I went to, one funeral with her and I was up the back sobbing, and she was up the front talking. It's like, oh, honey, how can you do it? And I felt a bit embarrassed because they probably thought I was part of the funeral, but I wasn't.
I think I've done 3 funerals with her. One was one of the biggest ones she's ever done. That was my first one. And that was a really dear friend of ours. We were kind of each other's support people because I wouldn't have been able to go to that funeral without her. And she wouldn't have been able to run the funeral without someone that she knew connected to him because he was like her best friend.
I just think death is such an important ritual in our life and it's just not spoken about. And Hayley and I often speak about it, how it's as important as a birth, but it's still such a taboo subject in our culture. It's like we're all going to die and people just don't want to talk about it.
It was my grandmother's death that just really propelled me forward in a very definitive, clear, yes, this is what I'm going to be doing for the next half of my life. She was my favourite human in the world. And her death was horrible. Everyone's got this notion and this feeling, we want to die in our sleep and do these things. But for a majority of people, and dying's really hard work, much like labour. And it was 5 days of watching her in the most extreme pain. They couldn't get a handle on her pain. So when that happens, when you're nearing end of life, if that hasn't been managed well, all hell can break loose, and it did for her.
Yeah, I think that's where Mum came, guns blazing. It's like, we need to change this. Actually, we don't even need to change it, we just need to go back to the way we used to do it. I think he will have a beautiful relationship with death because of the connection he has already with Hayley, which is his Gigi. Just explaining to him that when things do die, it's a really beautiful way to put it back in the earth, and that we put death back in the ground to, give the soil some fertilizer. But just things die.
We forget that animal part of us as well too, and the part of our brain that actually needs to tend to the dead and the body. We need to smell death. We need to touch it. We need to feel the weight of it. That's how we healthily grieve and how we healthily process the physical form of our loved one dying. Our love for them never stops. It's a mystery. We don't know what happens to us when we die. No one can give us that solid answer. It's a complete and utter unknown, and our next great adventure.
A beautiful family reached out to me, Diane, whose husband Kerry has been having a really long journey with cancer for many years. And I was at an event and I spoke there, and then she got a pamphlet and just saved it for when the day came or was getting closer. So she reached out to me about a month ago, letting me know what her wishes were for when he passed. And that was for him to stay at home and for his body to be at home. They also had home births with all their children. So it only made sense to die and do a home funeral and do everything themselves.
Kerry and I made a really deep commitment to each other. We were really drawn to each other through having a soulful life and a spirit life. And of course in relationships it can get pretty tough sometimes. So a funny way to engage big energies, is, you know, there's lots of different ways, but this was one way that we had fun with. We brought this back from our trip in Japan, and we were going to give it to our 5-year-old granddaughter. We were really excited. And she looked at it and she said, "No, I don't want it," and walked off. And so we thought, okay, well, this is this represents the masculine, this represents the feminine. And in our day-to-day life, of course, sometimes we'd be walking side by side. Sometimes we'd be thinking, "I'll go away." So we'd have a little joke about it. Well, where are we today? I have received so much in this week. I've received so much in this 43 years, but then again in this week I have received again. And I've received for myself too, that I can remain calm and graceful.
Death is, I personally believe, the most important rite of passage that we experience in our life, more so than birth. Death is the number one. I think if we get death right and come back to that place of deep respect, understanding and honouring, it transforms our lives in the way that we live it. Full stop.